without further ado, I'm really delighted to welcome Dominic Gunn, who's going to be leading our network this morning. And Dominic is a SEND transition specialist. So thank you, Dominic. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me to talk about one of my favourite areas, which is starting school. As you said, Sally, they're always relevant, but having a very high profile at the moment. Just a little bit about myself before we switch screens, and I have got some slides to show, but it's not going to be a hideous run of PowerPoint slides, so I'll pop those up in a minute. But just before that, a little bit about me. So I'm an early childhood education commentator and advisor. I'm a subject matter expert for the Department for Education on child development, and I'm going to refer to some of their resources, which you might not all have seen, especially if you're working in schools rather than preschool settings. You might not have come across those. It's really important to flag those up. I'm an affiliate of the Helen Hamlin Centre for Pedagogy 0 to 11, but I am also still a specialist teacher for early years for a large local education authority. I particularly like that, keeping that on, because it means I'm actually meeting children and parents and the situations that we're talking about. So I don't just have a research and advisory role at the moment. And I enjoy that balance very much. Okay, has that come up all right?
Yeah, we can see clearly. Thank you.
That's lovely. So we call it Starting School for All. I haven't put the words SEND, special educational needs, in there. If any of you have read anything that I've written or heard me speak before, I do quite often ask the question, why do we have SEND in early years when we already have the unique child? And that theme does kind of run through a lot of the evidence that we have. It's supported by evidence and themes that are being driven by the DfE, that actually the best kind of education that we offer is well placed when we think of the unique child, and of course that encompasses everyone. So I called it Starting School for All, but we are in a second going to look at some specific recognised needs which you are all working with at the moment, I would imagine. If not, you certainly will be, and they will be starting mainstream school this September. I put transition, developmental stages, which is really important, and real or perceived additional means. No judgment there on perceived additional needs. It could be children who are like on a diagnostic pathway, for example, but with your experience, or if you're new to teaching, your growing experience, you will be making good assessments about children long before they get a diagnosis. The only other thing I was going to say on this first slide is that these will all come under the term disadvantaged groups. You'll see that in DfE material at the moment. It's a term which we've used before, but perhaps it's focused a little bit more just on socio-economic reasons. But disadvantaged now is going to be children who, for any reason, are finding it harder to make progress with their personal development and their progress in the curriculum as well. Okay, just put some nice pictures up there to remind us what we're talking about. I've collected these. Some of them are from the Frobel Trust. I've checked them in the resources at the end, so because I've borrowed their pictures. I just love looking at photographs like this as much as I like being in the situation with these children. We've got the little girl on the left there, the intense focus and pleasure that she's got with some small world characters. Her friends is busily occupied as well. That's just the world that I like to be in all the time, and that's the world that we work with in preschool, and we want to continue into reception. It's a good time to remind ourselves, I think, as I've said, that transition to school is within the same curriculum. It's a 0 to 5 curriculum. It's not a separate curriculum when we start school. And on the school visits that I make, sometimes it does appear like it is. I'm very lucky actually that I do get to meet so many schools. On average, we have about 115 to 130 children with identified additional needs starting school just in my district, and there are 12 districts. So that's we could roughly say 1,000 children every year that we get to see starting school with additional needs. And I think in every case, I'm raising the point that this is the same curriculum. Got a child there engaged beautifully with her educator who was using some Makaton to help her communicate with really good concentration. Down in the middle picture there, we've got a little boy. He's just playing with twigs outside. And as early childhood educators, we know how important that is, and we know what learning is going on there. We might not always be able to articulate it and advocate it to those who aren't early childhood educators, and that's something we need to get better at. But we know that that is something we aim for, and what terrific deep thought is going on with him there. And then the one in the bottom corner, this is from the Frobel Trust. I'd recommend having a look at their pamphlets, which are free to download from their website. Where they do have lovely photos and guidance on there. And there he is exploring the space around him in, I mean, it could be a domestic setting. It could be a setting that has that sort of warm, homely type feel to it. But he's enjoying sitting in it. It looks like a drawer, doesn't it? A drawer that's pulled out of a chest of drawers. And we're going to talk about children and their sense of space shortly. I've put the title with that, time to play, time to think. That's what we want to continue throughout the EYFS. We have just had some, well, I found this quite alarming actually, information from the DFE, which just came out, well, this month actually, in their publication, Getting Children Ready for Reception. Even in the earliest stages of school, less than half of those who miss 15 to 20% of sessions return to regular attendance next year. And that is, I raised that because of the number of children who have been attending part-time in year R this year. You may not have come across that. I've come across a lot of it, and we know that nationally it's a serious issue. And in a lot of those cases, the children were attending full-time at preschool. So that's something for us all to think about. I'm just going to have a quick run through here of particular named needs. So let's have a quick look there. Autism. I am a trainer for what's now that used to be the Autism Education Trust, which is the educational arm of the National Autistic Society, now NEN, Neuro Inclusive Education Network. You've probably come across them since it's part of the National Autistic Society. Recommend doing their training even if you are familiar with autistic children. Sensory processing, part of autism, but also existing on its own. ADHD, of course, we don't diagnose ADHD in the early years in this country until age 7 or more than that. But we are able to look at the visible behaviors and learning patterns of children who might go on to have a referral for an assessment of ADHD. Adverse childhood experiences, which could be a range of things. I've put all of those three together. We don't really identify dyscalculia with very young children, perhaps not even dyslexia, although it'll be on our minds. Dyspraxia, we will see plenty of that. And that, I just check my notes there, will be quite often called developmental coordination disorder. So DCD, sorry, dyspraxia. Developmental delay, an area that I've just become particularly interested in because partially it's the only diagnosed, well, is it the only? I've asked about this before. I think it's either the only or the main diagnosed area. That's a pediatrician would diagnose this, and you could see it even on an EHCP. But developmental delay is a need which does not necessarily stay with you for life. So it's a temporary diagnosis sometimes. Particularly interesting area because of that. Speech, language, and communication needs, again, we don't diagnose developmental language disorder usually under 5, but you might come across it in year R. It would usually be once you've started school. DLD is an interesting one for me because 5 or 6 years ago, there was lots of training about it, lots of publicity, and now it's gone really, really quiet. There's plenty about autism still, a lot coming through about ADHD, but I don't think DLD has been cured. It's still there. It just isn't getting the profile that it was having. So we do need to get back to that. And I did this recently, and it's not a named need COVID, but we're now in the window where we can see the impact of children who were born during COVID lockdown or whose parents were deeply affected by that while mother was carrying baby. Um, and the impact of that on parents has been huge. Still to be investigated, but it has had a huge impact. The areas I haven't put in here are physical disability, hearing impairment, vision impairment. They should be covered. They should always be covered. Should be a statutory requirement, whereas the other needs not so much. I think the positive way things are moving at the moment in education, partly with funding and partly with awareness and a commitment for early intervention. I think we're heading towards a good place for all types of needs. But PD, HI, and VI, you should find that covered already. So we're leaving that for the moment. Just wanted to mention a term that I came across fairly recently by Professor Guy Claxton at King's College in Cambridge. And he didn't coin this phrase, but he's been using it a lot, which is the phrase body mind. And I'm using that particularly in relation to sensory processing. Body mind is a way of describing how all of our senses feed into our learning, our understanding of the world, the way we process information. And when we put those together, it does help us in early childhood education and for our colleagues who work with older children, that all of those senses are involved. And the more we narrow that down to formal academic type learning, the more we reduce body-mind experiences. So we're going to hear a lot about that more in the future. Right, just a few well, points from the EYFS. Clearly states children develop and learn at different rates. I think you can probably see where we're heading with this. That's a fact. Effective practice is a mix of different approaches. So we should all be expecting to have different approaches for our individual children and our cohorts. And then this one I particularly like. Practitioners, that word, by the way, I think that's going to change to educators. We've been talking about that a lot, and that includes us all more suitably. So educators must reflect on the different rates at which children are developing and adjust their practice appropriately. That one's relevant for me at the moment as I've seen so much sort of grouping, catch-up groups, out of class catch-up groups in year R, I'm talking about mostly now. I'm not sure that is quite captured by the phrase educators must adjust their practice. Putting children in a catch-up group isn't the same as us changing what we do in the whole classroom. Generally, it's something that we find easier in nurseries and preschools. We do more instinctively, but it is there, and that is a mandatory requirement that we do so. Quick activity then, since I've been talking for a while. Thinking back to the slide with the needs on, I can put that up while you're thinking, how might our planning and practice need to adapt for each of these needs? If you're not familiar with all of those, don't worry about it. This is really an opportunity, a safe space, we might say, to raise questions. If you feel undertrained or underskilled in those areas, nothing would be inappropriate for you to ask about that or for you to jot down. If you do want to put it in the chat, that would be nice. But if you just want to reflect on it for yourself, do so, and we can follow that up in session 2. So how might our planning and practice need to adapt for, and let me just go back to the slide. Any of those and COVID. Yeah, we'll just have like a minute or two to think about that. I think we might find that actually you're doing a lot of this and you do it so instinctively that when you come to try and write it down, you're not even aware what you might have done.
Hi, yeah, so I was just going to say, so the scaffolding that you've got in place to support the children, like depending on their needs, also teaching to the skill rather than an activity. So what the skill is, what the outcome is that you want for the children. I think also meeting the children at their developmental needs, and being really aware of like that unique child that we've spoken about, and having that awareness for them.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I think you've got two things there. With that first point, when you're talking about scaffolding, um, you're talking about, are you talking about like more of an adult directed task, which would be really important?
I think it's just the support that that child might need. So, for example, if you know that they struggle with a um with scissors, having those sorts of, having the squeezy scissors available for them. If you know that if you're doing something around numbers, if you know that they're struggling with identifying those numbers, if you have adapted the sort of learning environment to support them at their developmental needs rather than having a blanket approach to sort of like what you're trying to show them and what you're trying to teach them.
Yes, that's great. And you're probably doing that as you're going along, as well as having planned it in advance and set things up in the morning. Would you say it's a mixture of both of those?
Yeah, and I think also it's kind of being aware of like that your children and really knowing them, and what their sort of barriers to their learning are, and I think having that awareness already and having the environment that's accessible to them, and that being aware of that, every year the cohort changes, their needs change, obviously all children's sort of learning opportunities change, and I think it's kind of knowing them really well helps you support them and helps them overcome sort of some of those barriers.
It's really helpful, Kieran. Thank you for the section. It's really interesting what you said there about like the scissors, for example. They're like um, in your current role, perhaps you would notice this. We can have children who are using those comfortably in their preschool setting, and then find that they're not so readily available in year R. Um,
Yeah,
and
I think,
it's yeah,
yeah, it's just
carry on.
bringing that sort of awareness, I think, for from the experience that I've had, is kind of having the environment set up for the children to be able to thrive and not be, having to look to the practitioners and having that independence. I think also, for example, when I was teaching, we would have, we'd have a variety. For myself, I'd have like a variety of differences. We have a variety of different sorts of pencils, and allowing the children and to explore them, and then also being able to support them based on their needs.
You're conjuring up a lovely
That
picture
was,
there of looking at the unique child rather than having just a plan of various materials that are, resources that are all available, um, which is
yes,
really
I
nice to
always used to
hear.
I used to always go for sort of what is the skill that you want the child to learn rather than the activity, because sometimes children can take a different like to different activities, and they might have a completely different outcome than what you'd intended, but that's completely fine as long as there's new learning that's taking place and we're building
Yeah.
on sort of their experiences.
You used an important word there when you said independence. I'm wondering for everybody here, if you're familiar with the term agency, I'm sure you are, but I wonder if you've come across the kind of most recent definition of agency, which was really kind of brought together by the Helen Hamlin Centre for Pedagogy, actually 0 to 11, and they have defined a children's agency as the socially situated capacity to act. So if you think of having the right sort of scissors available, but in amongst the situation where all of the other children are using scissors for whatever crafting they're doing, or if they're based at an atelier with various kind of creative resources there, that agency is going to be enabled or compromised, isn't it, by not having the right scissors there. Now can seem like a small thing, but Kieran, the way you just mention that. The impact on a child of thinking, I can't use the other scissors, I don't know where the right scissors are, could be, well, I'll go off and do something else. Although might seem like a small example, when we get into things, other fine motor skills, especially handwriting, it has a huge impact on self-image and self-belief as a learner. So thanks for that contribution and for reminding me to talk about agency there as the socially situated capacity to act, which is something we're striving for. Had some nice phrases there. That definition of agency and body mind. This is just to remind us really what we're all about. I think there we go. It's the brain, early brain development. We've got our neurons there. I'm sure now that we're pretty much born with all the neurons we need and we pretty much keep them all. What we don't have is the neural pathways. It's connecting them all together. So there's a film of some neural pathways being formed. We're going to go on to a clip now. We tried this just before you all joined us. The sound is incredibly quiet on this. You might be able to hear it by turning up, but it seemed to be a bit sort of jerky. But it is subtitles, so I think that we're going to be okay with that. This is Dr. Jack Shonkoff. Some of you might have come across him before. He did a lot of the research at Harvard University, which fed into the brain story. I'd recommend that if you've got a lot of time on your hands and you're absolutely fascinated by brain development, because it's the best training you can have on that. We now have it in this country. It's called the Oxford Brain Story. So you might be interested in that, and you get a certificate at the end. But it is 20 hours work with tests at the end of every hour's work. But it brings together the whole world's research on that, and you can see here it's been, by the little mark in the corner, it's been taken up by UNICEF. So I'm going to play that, but I think you'll find it easy just to read it. If you come back after and say it's too jerky, I'm going to go through and just read it again for you. So let's see how we can get on with that.
Create a sense of emotional safety that allows growth. When you cover your face with a cloth and play peekaboo, the baby is learning. Why is the baby still laughing every single time you do this? It's because first it's the personal interaction. It's very important. But second, the baby is mastering the concepts of things disappearing and coming back and knowing that they still exist. If a baby keeps wanting to do this, there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is the baby's brain is saying, I am mastering this. I'm learning a lot from this. I'm enjoying the learning experience. Ask yourself, what does my baby enjoy? And then ask yourself, why do you think the baby enjoys doing that? And the answer always is because it is helping to build the baby's brain.
There are a few things that leap out to me every time I look at that. Well, I mean, he doesn't refer to Winnicott there, but he's talking about when babies are trying to check that something is still there when they're playing peekaboo. It works. It's such an important activity for parents, and if we're in a setting where we've got babies, incredibly important, that phase of learning. Seeing if something happens again the way that you expect it. All learning is built on that. And if we just go back to the brain there. I won't go too much into neurology in case you're up to speed with it. Just a quick reminder there that the brain is not a kind of an organ that has curiosity in itself. Is the curiosity it has is predictive. It wants to know if what it thinks is going to happen will happen. So it has an experience and then it wants to find out if it's true. So repetition is absolutely central to brain development. Now that needs to make us question our own pace, especially when we start to be a little bit more adult-led in presenting the curriculum, but also in terms of things like, we're going to come on to time and timetabling next, in the way that we move children around. The brain is just trying to check that what it thought was going to happen is going to happen. And without that, the neural pathways aren't formed correctly. And that has a debilitating effect on mental processing. So while we're talking about things like cognitive load and adaptive teaching, and later on there might be a place for intervention groups and all this sort of thing when children get a bit older, we've got to remember that brain development is where we are in early childhood education. I'm sure you're familiar with synaptic pruning, but just a quick reminder there. Every experience that our young children get, including in year R, will form the initial neural connection between new neurons. It will go into the memory, and the memory will try and then recall that. And so that processing in the frontal lobe there has got information to work with. Now, that's all the experiences children get. And some of those experiences aren't good, are they? We mentioned adverse child experiences earlier. They are embedded in that. So when we come to synaptic pruning, what the brain will do is just stop feeding those neural pathways that don't seem to be useful, don't have any joy in them, or don't have a sensory impact. So they could still be negative, I'm afraid, but there has to be an impact. It just kind of they just disappear. That's synaptic pruning. And then what we think of as the neural superfast highway is where the same thing happens over and over again. And at its best, it's filled with joy. So that's why we want children to be smiling and laughing and singing a lot of the time, because they learn at a much more secure and fast rate when that happens than any other time. I know some rushes are built in by things that we are expected to do, especially by some calendar dates. I'm not quite ambivalent about that. I know overall that trying to assess children at a particular calendar date, we know it's a bit silly. What we don't want it to be is harmful. So we need to check ourselves that we're not causing harm by that. We do need to have some kind of formal assessment to share. The early years profile is really useful for year one teachers. Whether we need to change the content or how we collect it, that's a different matter, but having that is really useful. Baseline on entering year R, there's a lot of feeling that that's not really necessary. And if we have the best transition, I think I would support that. If we have the best transition, why would you need baseline? Because you're already giving the information through. That might possibly go, but the profile, that has to happen. But it is still at a calendar date. 30th of June, you're going to have that all done. And it is a bit strange. So we get this sense of perhaps a rush, but we don't want to let that feed into our practice. So key opportunities, these are part of the earliest foundation stage curriculum. We can use that time however we want. We're not told how to teach. We invent those timetables as adults, and we need to keep asking ourselves, is that in the child's best interest? Repetition is central to learning. I said I'm really interested in developmental delay. Nearly always, where children have temporary or a permanent developmental delay, repetition will be the most useful thing for us to remind ourselves that they need. They need to do it for longer. They need to do more of the same, perhaps with some different resources, but mostly it cannot be rushed. I've put beware commercial programs there. It's not that they don't have helpful content. A lot of them, probably most of them, have some useful content, but they do tend to rush us through them. So we don't want to be moving children on before they're ready to. In a practical practical example, we might come across this in session 2. If you've got one child that's just starting to speak, but only when they are using farm animals, and we don't put the farm animals out every day in exactly the same place for them, then we're kind of getting in the way of a natural language development, aren't we? Generally, I think we tune into that and we'll make sure those farm animals are ready. If we've forgotten, we'll get them out as we go along. But we need to be ready to tune to each unique child and help them repeat what they need to. And we'll be guiding it, of course, so that they're not just spending the whole time doing one thing over and over again. The enabling environment, it's in the EYFS curriculum, sometimes referred to as the extra educator, the extra member of staff, because when our environments are set up well and we enable access to those, we allow access, and I'm not just talking about for physical disabilities, although obviously that's important. They will do some of the work for us. So we'll be watching the child, but we're still able to move with other children and have some distance. A good enabling environment is like an extra adult. And then the key person. This is slightly awkward for the Neuro-Inclusive Education Network, part of the National Autistic Society, because they use the word key worker in the early years training, and we're urging them to take that out. Now, of course, there is no key worker in early childhood education. There is a key person. It's a statutory role and a statutory term, and it goes until the end of year R. And that was chosen purposely so that it's not like a key worker for like a social services case, for example. And of course, the ratios change when you get into year R, but key person is still a particularly efficient way of making sure that children have someone who is spending extra time and thought on individual children. I hope this comes across okay. This is just talking about how the environment does some work for us.
Finish, kids, but you can do that in a minute after you're at your dinner, okay? Stop ringing me, Richard. You're not the dad, okay? I don't love you anymore. I think you know. Bye. See you later.
Without going into the content, which we could also do, I put this in partly to let's think about the environment, about the time it takes for children to process their experiences. The scene we've just watched there, that's not invented out of nothing, is it? That's come from somewhere. It might not be personal family, it might have been from another child, personal family, or it could have been from TV or something like that. But the little girl in that picture, that's from The Secret Life of 5-Year-Olds, by the way, the Channel 4 series. She's trying to work out what's going on in her world. She's trying to make sense of the world. And we can come in and out of that as we feel necessary as the educators. We don't want to stop children having that experience with that level of agency. The term teacher as researcher crops up a lot in Reggio Emilia and also Froebel. And I think that's a nice example of how we're learning from the children. All educators are also researchers about our children, and these environments enable us to do that at our best. So quick activity then. Just you can think about this on your own, make some of your own notes. If you put them in the chat, that's great. Or we've got time for a call out, I think. Yeah, we have. If anybody wants to do that. How are we, in our settings in our schools, how are we controlling children's time? We can go straight in with timetabling. I can absolutely say we timetable too much in year R in almost every year R class that I have ever been into, which is a lot now. Why are we timetabling so much? I think the obvious answer for that is, well, no, sorry, there's two answers. One is we feel like we've got a lot to get through as year R educators. Perhaps we feel like we're being watched at getting through that, which is not what the EYFS says. It says you have to teach the content of it. You don't need to constantly prove that you're ticking it off. So you don't need to race through that, but we perhaps feel like we do. And the other thing is slightly weirder. It looks more educational. So timetabled, heavily adult-directed sessions look educational. They just have the appearance of it. It's a top-down approach that's come all the way from secondary, really, through Key Stage 2, that we're trying to move children from playing in the nursery to having timetabled learning as they get older. That's not how children learn when they're young, and it is damaging. So we need to think very carefully about the amount of transitions we have within each day. Opportunity for repetition. linked to timetabling. Access to outside. This has got a lot better. I've been doing this role for just over 10 years now, for the local authority. That has got better, but it's patchy. Access to outside education tends to be a lot better in preschool. 6 weeks later, when children are at school, it tends to be a lot smaller. Why? Is it because we've assessed that child and they don't need to be outside? Well, all of the research says no. The curriculum says no. The EYFS is designed to be learned as much outside as inside. So we do need to think about that. And then another aspect of time for that educator-child relationship. You do not want to feel rushed. You want to, and I know that the ratios are different in year R, but you want to feel that when you're sitting with a child, you're enjoying their company and they're enjoying your company. That needs to be genuine exchanges for that child, because that brain is still developing, and a little bit like the baby playing peekaboo, they're still in that zone. Okay, just a minute to think about that. Jot down any thoughts or call out if you've got anything. Thank you. Sally.
Thank you, Eleanor. I was talking with Dominic earlier just before the session about transitions, and a really useful activity that I've done with my teams was that sort of documenting what are the transitions that we are expecting our children to sort of manage throughout every day within our settings. And we really thought about transitions before nursery school or whatever setting we are in. So you know that from waking up and then getting to school, they might get on a bus, they might go in the car and so forth, coming in, and then just kind of documenting all of the stop starts and really unpicking, are they necessary? Do we need them? What is the point? What is the purpose? Because we were quite shocked. We started this work a couple of years ago, when we were really focusing on trauma-informed practice and principles of nurture. And it really is quite thought-provoking when you think, my goodness, I think we had far too many stop starts, and it really does make you reflect. If we're stopping the children from their child-led play, what is the purpose of that, and do we need to stop them, and is it necessary? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sally, for backing that up with some further examples there. So we can help each other out with that. There often we are putting stresses on ourselves as year R educators, which we actually don't need to. The amount that is dictated from senior leadership who are not early years experts like we are, that varies from school to school quite a lot. But we do need to make sure that we understand what we're doing so well that we can advocate for the teachings, for the pedagogy that we want to employ. We don't want anyone from outside telling us what that should be, because they won't know better than we do. And if we can't find the words to advocate that properly, to describe it, we're sort of talking from a weak platform, and we need to talk from a strong platform. Because in practice, we've got a strong platform, but it's not one of our strengths to be able to articulate how children learn best when they're young. So other things that work in our favour with the early years foundation stage curriculum, there are hardly any statutory requirements in it. You have to teach the content of that rather than inventing a different content. So you have to teach that. We have to have the two-year-old check. We have to have, at the moment, baseline, and we have to have a profile. There are certain things we have to do in terms of things like teaching phonics, but actually legal requirements are quite light within EYFS. And those comments that we opened this presentation with about responding to children's needs are much more forceful than anything else. Again, that's just a reminder that sometimes I say sometimes, a lot of the time, we're inventing things that we feel we should do, but we're not actually told to do that by the government. We have this wonderful role throughout the EYF EYFS, where we are like another parent. We're still, for the child's point of view, we're still in the parent zone. We'll often get called mum or dad, and the relationship during that period, if we've got the relationship we should have, will be as trusting and supporting as if it was a parent. So we are in the parent zone, and the parent zone is particularly hot for learning. We know that children in up until the age of, or around 5, the speed at which the brain is developing is huge. The pace is fierce, and that comes through those intimate personal relationships. We are in the parent zone, and that works in our favor in every way. We have PSED as a prime area, and we couldn't have this presentation without talking about self-regulation, which is, self-regulation is now considered the most significant predictor or enabling factor of a child's future academic and life success. It surpasses IQ, surpasses socio-economic status. We used to say that speech and language development was the greatest predictor, and of course, it's still really important. A previous Minister for Education said that math skills were, without having any evidence. And we all love maths, don't we? It's brilliant in the early years. But it's not that. It is self-regulation. And if we think about it, of course it's self-regulation, because if you have good self-regulation, you can access the support that's given to you for any of the other difficulties that you might be having. If you don't have self-regulation, you're not going to be able to access those. You're going to be impulsive, you're going to be distractible, you're going to be confrontational, you're going to find it difficult sharing space, perhaps with an adult, definitely with your friends. And remember, we want socially situated learning. That's the best learning. And lack of self-regulation affects that. So self-regulation is the #1 factor. And we're not getting into a sort of, a competition like which area is best in early years. It's not like that. But it's great that it is recognized so much now. If you have children transitioning where self-regulation is a concern, that needs to be a priority. We can't just say, well, you're in school now, we'll use stickers. If you behave, you get stickers and rewards, and if you don't, you won't, because those children are the ones that wouldn't get it anyway. So we don't go in that direction. They will learn self-regulation. You know how, don't you? It's by playing with their friends. So we need to increase a lot of those slightly more difficult situations for some of those children with the adult involved. Time consuming for those of us with that lower year-R ratio, but that's what they need. And also, the EYFS is thinking back to sensory processing. It is a sensory curriculum designed to be learned in a sensory manner. Lots of people are spending out on sensory rooms or trying to build in sensory circuits in their timetables. I'm not saying that we wouldn't ever use them, and they have been incredibly helpful for some older children. Invaluable. But with our curriculum, it's designed to be learned in a sensory manner. So we need to understand where the sensory experiences are and just enhance those. It says, what questions should we be asking as the receiving school? So we're moving on to that focal point of sharing information for transition. If we're the year-R teacher, what questions should we be asking, as well as what should we be providing? Just a quick reminder, if we were looking at the scissors example, I think that we talked about earlier, just saying fine motor skills aren't as developed as they should be, that might not be enough. We might, as the preschool educators, we might need to be saying, this child needs the springy scissors, or the scissors attached to a block, or the left-handed scissors, and they need to be available at the atelier, at the creative area from day 1. So that's a different type of transition from most of the ones that I see. Are there any practical obstacles to continuing the provision 6 weeks later? If it was working in July and then we do something totally different in September, we've got to have a very good reason for that, and I don't usually see that. Now, I am going to stay on afterwards for final thoughts and questions, which you might follow up, but I really wanted to talk about the resources, which is the following slide. This is a photo from a Packaway Nursery that I visit. I just wanted to give a shout out to Packaway Nurseries in particular. You can see there, it's a village hall. They'll need to get rid of everything, lock it away in the cupboards, because the yoga club's coming in after lunch, or if they're there all day, they'll have the planning for the summer fair, and they'll coming in later on. And they do an incredible job, sometimes with limited resources and certainly in a challenging area. So that's a lovely little picture that always makes me happy. References. Child development training models. I explained that I've been working on those as a subject matter expert, and that's with the specific briefs to make them relevant for year R. They were always relevant in content, but they just had pictures of nursery children and babies in. So anyone scanning through it would think, oh, that's already covered. I don't need it in year R. You absolutely do if you haven't seen it. Again, you get a certificate for that. And that's a lot lighter than the brain story. So if you haven't seen that, if you're let's say a mature educator, you might not need that. But if you're new to it, do have a look at it. The language and I think the films have been made. I don't know if they've been uploaded yet, but they have been specifically tailored to make it year R relevant. Year R friendly, I would say. It was always relevant, but now it looks like it more. Siren Films are a great company that if you need your own training amongst yourselves, they've got blogs on there which are really useful. They've got interviews. The films themselves, if you're not quite sure what to do at a staff meeting, at a team meeting, just watch one of those films and talk about it. What a wonderful team they are. The Oxford Brain Story we've talked about. ISI, that's Environmental Impacts on Neurological Development. That's now Dr. Sam Wass, a significant leader in that, who was part of The Secret Life of 4 and 5-year-olds. That's where they're measuring brain activity live on children, rather than while they're playing, while they're learning, rather than in labs and clinics, which was how it was done before, which was still very useful, but not as useful as this will be. Early education is a terrific source for reading and processing new information. I recommend everyone belonging to another organisation. If you're not already, join an early years professional organisation. You won't regret it. If you're having most of the time, it's just really useful. If you're having a slightly difficult time, it's a source of hope and nourishment and enthusiasm to get you ready to go in the next day. Do join one of the great early childhood organisations. Birth to 5 Matters, that's being updated at the moment. I didn't put Development Matters because you've got that. That's the official one that comes out. Birth to 5 Matters, a hugely expanded and different version from Development Matters. Absolutely get that. And the new one when it comes out. Neuro-Inclusive Education Network Autism Training does support ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette's. DFE, getting ready for it. There's a number of them who have come out, so I'm sure you're on top of those DFE documents, and the Frobel Trust. So some contact details there for me. I've put my LinkedIn address there. I do also use Blue Sky, but that's more sort of chatty, a little bit more sort of kind of a lighter version perhaps than LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to use those. Okay, so I'll stop sharing there now. And good to see you all again. So I hope that was useful.